Hello and welcome to Inside the Gun Gallery special online series that lets you experience work of art in the Gun Gallery's collection through a chat with one of Kenyon's professors. I'm Jody Kovach, your host. I'm the curator of academic programs, and our special guest today is Sherly Hemkin, associate provost and professor of chemistry. So today we're going to talk about this print.
But before we do, we'd like you to stop and pause for a moment, and we'd like you to look at the work and draw some conclusions, make an inference. What is it trying to tell you? What representation comes to your mind when you look at this? And since I'm a professor in chemistry, part of the reason why I wanted people to do this was to see how your interpretation of evidence or experimental data changes with the addition of new inputs of information. So if you could interpret this as like one piece of the experiment, and then Jody's going to go on and give you some more inputs of information, more experimental data, and try to see how does your interpretation change as you get more and more information. That's part of what I was doing, why I wanted to come and look at this painting.
Right. So pause your screen for a moment and take a look at this for a while. I would say give it about 10 minutes. That's what we had your students do, right?
Yeah.
Some exercises we extended to longer, as long as 15, 20 minutes, but that's really testing attention spans. So 10 minutes is a good period of time. Take that and see what you learn about this work of art.
Yeah. Do you draw any information about what's happening, or is there does it look like a certain period of time? Does it evoke emotion? Mm-hmm. What happens when you look at that?
What happens, right?
So,
all right, now you've come back from your 10 minutes of looking, so I'll tell you a little bit about this from the art historian's perspective.
So these are more pieces, if you were a scientist, you'd think about this as more evidence, experimental evidence coming in at you.
Right. So this is a print by the artist Adolph Gottlieb, and the title is Arabesque from 1967. Adolph Gottlieb is a really well-known American artist, kind of an icon of 20th century American art, so we're really fortunate to have this in our collection. He was a chief proponent of abstraction and expressionism in the 30s and 40s in New York. And he was very influential in New York painting circles. And this is an example of the later development of his style. It was, he made this in the 60s, and this is actually not a painting, but a silkscreen print. So this is something that came out of experimentation, a period of experimentation when he went out to the California desert and was exploring surrealism, ideas about surrealism. And he was meditating on the California desert and was trying to create forms to make visual different forms in his artwork that would evoke the archetypes of the collective unconscious. And so in other words, he wanted these forms to resonate with us in a really almost subliminal sort of way. He didn't want to have any recognizable forms appear. But I think we can argue that this composition here really does reference recognizable tropes of landscape painting, for example. We kind of have a strong horizontal, the circular forms in what we might imagine to be the sky. It's kind of resemble planets or the sun. There's some sort of rhythmic movement here too. That it corresponds to ideas about nature. So these are ways that an art historian would probably begin to interpret this. But Cheryl, I know this was one of your favorite works in the collection. And right away, we wanted to use this for the exercise that we just had you perform for your chemical kinetics and thermodynamics.
Exactly.
Exact class.
Yeah, it was. So this class, the chemical kinetics and thermodynamics, it's a class for mainly juniors and seniors. And so they're at the point where they're starting to be a little more independent in how they view information, how they do their experiments, and so forth. And so part of what I wanted this exercise to do is for students to see how experiment can connect to conclusion or to theory, and to understand a little bit that it's not, while it's all based on evidence, your personal background or what you know or what your experience level is also colors how that conclusion is being drawn. And so, for example, when I first looked at this, I kind of saw something, I don't know, I probably would go with the sun for the red ball and some sort of, I don't know, stuff going on, activity going on with the black lines. But when I heard the word Arabesque, those black lines turned into dancers for me. And so my interpretation, my conclusion was skewed tremendously when I got that second input of information. Of course, I was interpreting Arabesque as a dance movement and not necessarily as a design element. And so having two different definitions, you could see how your interpretation, your conclusion could start to go in many different directions. And so this is what I wanted students to start to recognize, is that the same type of thing can happen in a science experiment. However, oftentimes you might not recognize it as much because it's not as familiar to you. You're often working with the unknown. You're working in a medium, chemistry, that might not be as familiar to you as just like having your own thought process of looking at this work of art. And I thought that might be a useful way to try to draw an analogy to the process that we go through doing science. And it's not that making interpretations or using the lens of your background is necessarily a bad thing, but we have to be aware of it. And we have to understand that sometimes that could cloud our vision. And so we need to be as open as we can.
Right.
That gives
Yeah.
some context to what we were doing.
Right. I think that little exercise that we had them do really opened up a lot of questions for the students, which is exactly what art can do. And sometimes maybe only art is the way to impart this way of understanding information that we encounter, that it's not, it never gives us absolute knowledge, but the students, for example, I remember you had them come and look at this work and a couple of others and answer a series of questions, just a few questions to sort of structure their interpretations. And then I think when we came back together as a group, they brought out all sorts of different perspectives and interpretations about what they thought this meant.
I think one of the things, the reasons why I found the artwork to be really helpful is that you're kind of free, especially something abstract, you're really kind of free to make interpretations. It's not like there's clearly one right answer or one wrong answer. And so I think it's easier to talk about that rather than perhaps an experiment where if you're a chemist, you kind of start to feel like you should know the answer, or there is a right answer or a wrong answer. So this gives us a little bit more leeway to talk about the uncertainty of the process. So some of the people that thought, like I did, this red guy was kind of like a sun. We, like you said, we asked other questions about, well, how confident are you that that's a sun?
Yeah.
And it's like, I was pretty confident of that before I knew the name of the painting. But once I knew the name of the painting, I I was less confident. I don't know that I was out in the sun now if I've got dancers down below. And so those are some of the other pieces that I think the artwork really helps illuminate, because I don't think you're feeling as much pressure to be right.
Exactly, and that was hopefully, as you said, liberating for the students to know that it's okay. Maybe sometimes it's better not to have the right answer, that this is how we generate knowledge. We ask questions, we make mistakes, that we accept ambiguity as an opportunity to learn something more, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes when you're too tied to your belief in the outcome, like, oh, okay, this set of data means X, it's hard to see when new information comes in that you might be wrong. I mean, maybe it was a great conclusion based on very limited understanding, but when you get a bigger, you see a larger picture, it might be different. I think we also talked about the parable of using an elephant. If you were blindfolded and brought up to an elephant, say you'd never seen an elephant before, you weren't told what it was. If you were able to just touch the trunk, your understanding of what an elephant is going to be much different than if you were touching the ear or the leg or something like that. So trying to think about how limited information coming in can color what your conclusion is, but the more you expand your evidence, your information, the better your picture can be. But you've got to be open.
You have to be open, and that leads me to my next question. Did you confront any challenges or any kind of pushback from students in a chemistry class when you told them we're going to work with this print?
You know, I think the wonderful part about being in a liberal arts school is that students really are open to doing something like this. I think it's unusual and different, and I don't know that they knew exactly what they were up to at the beginning, but when we started talking, I think that helped open the discussion and the understanding of how the art can blend and help us better understand what we're doing in science. So for that, I'm grateful. My students were always very, very willing to try new things, and that's one of the things I like about Kenyon students here.
Well, I think that you have such a great rapport with your students, and that was a really rewarding class for me too, because the students seemed to appreciate the new experience, and that to start off the semester, because we did it the first week of class, with this kind of as a foundation, this way of thinking. And so, since you're so good at looking at artwork and thinking of ways to use it for your teaching, I'm wondering if there are any other ideas that you have or concepts that you'd like to teach using art.
Well, one of the things, so Jody and I have also worked together on a different project where we were trying to help people understand moving between two-dimensional and three-dimensional objects. So we used some of the other works in the gallery to try to help illustrate that, because chemistry has a lot of figures, molecules that we represent in two dimensions. But as scientists, we're supposed to be able to understand them kind of automatically in our brain in three dimensions. And for some people, that's really hard to do. And so I think the work we did was very helpful with that. The other part that we haven't done but would be great is, observation is super critical to doing science. So spending some time in close observation of perhaps other types of works, that's maybe not as good as perhaps others for just trying to get in and really figure out what the details are and how does the artist convey certain themes or objects. But that would be something else that I'd love to do, just trying to hone your skills of observation.
Right, and that's something that takes practice and something that artwork is really, really a great tool to help develop.
Absolutely. So there's a variety of different things. And the other part, I'm also very just interested in color and how we see that, sense it through our eyes, so the neuroscience perspective. And so that's one of the other things that I would like to do in the future, perhaps, is something we can do with color and interpretation through the brain and so forth.
Well, you're always an inspiration to me, so thank you, Cheryl, for teaching with artwork and for being with us today to talk with us about the class sessions that you planned and conducted.
Well, it's my pleasure, and these guys are always so super helpful to work with. It makes it really easy, so thank you, Jody.
You're welcome. And thank you, Caroline Colbert, Director of Digital Content, for filming and editing Inside the Gun, and to Robin Goodman, Collections Manager, for making the artwork available to us today. And thank you, audiences, for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Inside the Gun.
Bye-bye, thanks.